Yeah. I'm an addict named Chuck. Thank you. I need to see you guys. There you go. As I said, I'm an addict named Chuck. I'm from the Heartland area of the Florida region. My home group is Show Me, Don't Tell Me in Lake Wales, Florida, which is meeting right now. We have a candlelight meeting on Saturday nights from 9:30 to 10:30. If you're ever in Central Florida, look us up, man. We'd be glad to have you drop in and visit. I was sitting out there just to quiet my mind and to invite God into this process, and God as I understand Him into this process, and also in memory of all of our predecessors who devoted their moments of silence to praying for us. I'd like to have another moment of silence and ask you to join me, please. Thank you very much. And just one more time so that all the people listening on tape can hear this. Is Narcotics Anonymous in the house tonight? Oh, you guys know how to celebrate clean time. I want to pack y'all up and put you in my suitcase and take you back to Florida with me. I'm going to tell them when I get back down to Frickney, you guys ain't been to a convention till you've been to ABCNA. Because I'm speechless. I was sitting down there watching this clean time celebration, watching the joy, watching the celebration, watching the love, the passion, and the emotion that you guys put into Narcotics Anonymous, and I'm already planning what town I'm going to move to up here. You guys left me speechless. I am overwhelmed. I am overwhelmed by your response to the message of Narcotics Anonymous. Before I get started, I want to thank the committee for ABCNA for inviting me up here. I was stunned, when I got a phone call, or actually an email, saying that they wanted me to call, and I thought it was a joke because the guy that sent me the email is a professional comedian, and I said, yeah, right. And he says, no, really. And I said, yeah, right. And he said, no, really. And I said, yeah, right. No, really. So I made the strangest phone call in my life. This is Chuck from Florida, and if I'm supposed to call you, I'm calling you. If I wasn't, please forgive me and excuse me, I got a phone call back, and here I am. And you guys have loved me to tears, because I can remember my last day. I can remember my last moment. I can remember that moment of surrender, that moment of desperation when I was lying on a locked bathroom floor because that's where my addiction had taken me. I was lying on the floor. I couldn't get high. I couldn't stop. And all I could do was yell out to God of my misunderstanding, either help me or kill me, because I can't live past the next 5 minutes. I can't live past the next 5 minutes. That was in 1977. God answered my prayer, and here I am tonight to tell you my story. To the newcomers, to the people with 90 days less, welcome. God bless you. I love you. How many people went through their first New Year's clean? Their first New Year's clean. Their first holiday season. Let me identify with you. My first New Year's Eve, I had a hot 60 days clean. My clean date is November the 1st. I had a hot 60 days clean, and I clung to the people. They had claw marks in their back from me. Where are you going? Can I go too? You going to coffee? Can I go? Those people carried me. They carried me, and they carried me, and they carried me until I could walk on my own. There's... I always like to say there's one good thing about being clean during the holidays. You can go shopping at the mall, park your car, go inside, and you don't have to wait till everybody leaves to find it again, But then I turned 50 and I can't say that anymore. Dude, where's my car? I always say when I introduce myself, and if I'm waiting, it works how and why up here, Senior Citizens Edition. But seriously, I'm grateful for this because I had 8 surgeries in 2 years on my eyes, and I almost lost my vision. And God brought me through that, God, and you guys brought me through it, and now, this is what I have to read, and if that's what I have to read, that's okay, because, I'm more interested in seeing good than looking good these days. But when I introduce myself, I always say I'm an addict first, and then I say my name is Chuck, because it's my way of reminding myself to put the principles of Narcotics Anonymous before my own personality, the things that make us one, ahead of the things that separate us and identify us as individuals. It's also my way of taking the focus off the messenger and putting it on the message of Narcotics Anonymous. And I'm not here tonight to call attention to a person. I'm here to call attention to a power, the power of God, working through the message of Narcotics Anonymous to restore addicts to a way of life that they have never known. What I love is an interactive audience, man. I tell you. Yeah. I don't have to worry about what y'all are thinking because y'all will tell me. But when I say I'm an addict, I say a lot of things about myself. I take the focus off the, when I say I'm an addict, I say a lot of things about myself that don't necessarily have to do with the use of drugs, you see. Because the message of Narcotics Anonymous is very simply this, that any addict can stop using drugs, lose the desire to use, and find a new way of life through the program of Narcotics Anonymous. Our message is hope and the promise of freedom from addiction. And when I say addiction, I'm not talking about narcotics. I'm talking about the disease of addiction, the obsession, the compulsion. When I say I'm an addict, I tell you a lot of things about myself. I tell you that I have a disease that's characterized by, identified by, but not limited to the use of drugs. You see, when I tell you I'm an addict, I tell you I'm an egomaniac with low self-esteem. When I tell you I'm an addict, I tell you that I measure my value by who I know, who I'm with, what I have, instead of who I am. You see. When I tell you I'm an addict, I tell you my drug of choice is more. You see. What was enough yesterday is not enough today. I'm addicted to new and different. When new and different becomes old and familiar, guess what? I got to get me some more new and different, So, when I tell you I'm an addict, I tell you I don't understand any part of the word no or wait, you see. When I tell you I'm an addict, I tell you my solution to a problem is usually worse than the problem. When I tell you I'm an addict, I tell you that I'm an emotional dyslexic, that I say what I don't mean and mean what I don't say. When I tell you I'm an addict, I tell you I have an overwhelming desire for love and attention that's matched only by a crippling fear of intimacy and commitment, which means I'm the kind of addict that likes to be held while I'm isolating. When I tell you I'm an addict, I tell you I got two emotions, homicidal, suicidal, two feelings, good and bad. My favorite 2 days of the week are yesterday and tomorrow, because I can't live in today, you see. When I tell you I'm an addict, I tell you I'm terminally unique. I'm not like anybody in the world, except all of y'all. See. When I tell you I'm an addict, I tell you I got diplomatic immunity from the laws that govern the rest of mankind and humanity. You know? The words express lane 10 items or less, no smoking, no parking, and turn your cell phones and beepers off, please, do not apply to me. I mean, don't you know who I think I am? When I tell you I'm an addict, I tell you that I can't take anybody's word for anything. I've got to learn everything on my own. Pain is my best teacher. When I tell you I'm an addict, I tell you I got to touch the paint to see if it's wet. I got to touch the stove to see if it's hot. And this is for all you people from Bubba country. I got to pee on the barbed wire fence to see if it's really electric, like the sign says. Some of y'all did that. And then want you to feel sorry for me when I find out that it is. I always catch a few with that one. When I tell you I'm an addict, I tell you I've got a disease that talks to me in my own voice. You see. When I tell you I'm an addict, I tell you that alone I'm in dangerous company. When I tell you I'm an addict, I tell you that I've been in some dope holes where angels wouldn't go, but the most frightening, dangerous neighborhood I've ever been in my life is the one between my ears. When I tell you I'm an addict, I tell you I ain't finished with nothing until I'm done. You see, until I'm done. And that's usually way past the point where I've had enough and you have too. And that moment for me, I always like to do that. It's just kind of a little exercise to loosen me up and humor, because I honestly believe, brothers and sisters, that if we get to a point where we can look back at the insanity of our lives and we can laugh about it, then we can live. If we can laugh, we can live. That moment for me, because, you know, I remember that moment when nothing was funny. When nothing was funny. Do you remember that moment when nothing was funny? Because if you remember that moment when nothing was funny, that moment will keep you here. The minute I forget that moment, I'm doomed to repeat it. That moment for me came lying on a bathroom floor when I reached out to God. I have to backtrack a little and tell you about myself. I was raised in a tiny community, Lake Wells, Florida. And before I go any farther, I'd like to say hello to all the people in the overflow room. I'm talking to you guys too. I love you. That moment, I was raised in Lake Wells, Florida, a small community. If there was drugs, if there was crime, if there was prostitution, I didn't see it. I lived a very sheltered life. I was an adopted child. Because I knew my biological mother, I had problems with my own identity, you see, because my mother put me up for adoption, and 6 years later she went out and adopted another kid, you know, and I knew this, and all of my life, and that's not a criticism of my parents. My mom did the best she could at the time, you know. That's just an explanation of where the seed started in me that festered and manifested itself as the disease of addiction. I had all of my needs, most of my wants. I led a detached life. I had no sense of identity. I grew up, I found solace in the church. I wanted to be a minister. I wanted to be a preacher, because because I felt pain, I felt like the greatest calling in my life would be to take away pain, to take away other people's pain. I was always standing up for the underdog. I was always comforting the person that was hurt. My mom had about 12 preachers on her side of the family, and she wasn't going to let her bright son go off to college and waste himself being a minister, because she thought that people who were preachers were just people who couldn't compete in the business world, so they became ministers and lived off the good graces of others, which, is neither here nor there. And Rhea was so glad tonight when she found out I was talking, because there's a difference between me and Antoinette. It's like fast forward and pause. Matter of fact, I talk slow. I talk so slow. The last signer lady at the last convention brought a book to read. So I said, because I'm an addict and because I have a need for approval, I will sacrifice my spiritual principles and my own happiness in order to get the approval of the people around me. I said, okay, well, I won't be a preacher. I'll go off to college and I'll study psychology. I ended up at Florida State University studying psychology, Woodstock generation. The kids from my hometown went into drugs. I followed them because I had no fear. I had not seen the horrors of drugs, I had no fear. When somebody came up to me and asked me, do you want to get high? I said, yeah. The first time I ever got high, I didn't get high on pot. I didn't get high on alcohol. Alcohol is a drug. I'm not multi-poly, cross, or dual addicted up here. I'm an addict and an addict, Addict and a postal worker, so y'all really need to watch out. I got high on a very heavy hallucinogenic. I took a hit of acid and we went to see the Allman Brothers Band and Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention. And the worm had turned. There was no going back. A year later, they were buying their stuff from me, and from the very beginning, I had a problem. The people who turned me on said, Chuck, you're not supposed to use every day, man. Well, really? What can I use every day, And this was during a time when three of our brightest stars in music, Jim Morrison, Janis Joplin, and Jimi Hendrix, all died that year of drug overdoses. And I'm sitting here going, well, this is the denial. The reason they died is because they're rich and they can afford better drugs. Like dead was better, They say that addiction is a smoldering death wish, and mine was Halley's Comet. In 3 years I was out of school. I was back in the town that I swore that I'd never go back to. I got a job in a lumber mill, which is a great place, if you're trying not to use. Followed a coworker into the postal service, and in the postal service, my using stood out like a sore thumb. I was always attracting attention, and I don't want to spend a lot of time, but you got to know some things. From the time I began using until the time I ended was only 6 years. But in those 6 years, I accomplished things using that it took some people a lifetime. I got to a point of degradation. You see, the disease of addiction is not about an instant. It's about that subtle accepting of more and more degradation, the acceptance of, well, that's not so bad. Well, when I get here, I'll stop. Well, that's not so bad. Well, when I get here, I'll stop. Well, that's not so bad. You see? And a lot of people, they look in the headlines and they see the crime and they see the death and they see the overdose and they see all of the stuff related to drugs and they think that's addiction. No, that's the end of the road. You see? The thing that makes you and I so valuable is we know where that road began. We know where that road began. I was flying into Newport News on an airplane. I was looking down on all the homes down beneath me, all the rich homes and the trailers and the middle-class homes, and I was wondering in how many of those homes the disease of addiction was living, right at that moment. Anyway, my behavior in the post office stood out like a sore thumb, and by this time I was out of control in 3 years. I used to get in all these adventures with my car. I had a Pontiac 350, Pontiac Ventura 350 engine racing downhill, one of them little... I drove my car into a lake one night, in the lake that was down the block from my mom and dad's house, and all of the people in the neighborhood that had known me since I was 6 years old were standing on the shore when the deputy waded me ashore. And I was like mad at them because I was embarrassed. Because when I tell you I'm an addict, I tell you it's always about me, you know. And I'm like, well, what's the matter with y'all? Ain't you never seen nobody drive their car into a lake before? Happens all the time in Chuck's world. You know? Woke up stumbling down a median of Highway 27 South one night in a blackout. I had to get across 2 lanes of traffic without being killed. I don't know how. With a sheriff's deputy driving along beside of me asking, who are you? Where are you going? What the hell are you doing out here on the median of Highway 27 at 4 o'clock in the morning? I was taking a shortcut home. I got my car stuck in a grove. And for most of the night, I stumbled around in a blackout in orange groves and a cow pasture. And the thing that had alerted the deputy is I was bleeding from my neck down to my shins because in a blackout, I had stumbled into a barbed wire fence. Me being in a blackout, I kept going forward. It being a barbed wire fence, it just stayed right where it was. You know? And there's something about barbed wire. Barbed wire is put up for 2 reasons: to keep things out and to keep other things in. You know, and I'm lucky that some Brahma bull is not wearing my butt for an earring today, because I was stumbling around in his bedroom at 4 o'clock in the morning. Because Brahma bulls are not easy to deal with. They have no sense of humor. They're very territorial, and they take everything personal. Kind of like an 1,800-pound newcomer. Let me rephrase that. Kind of like this a newcomer. I don't know about the rest of y'all, but when I came in, I was fighting like you were fighting. Because I was trying to convince everybody how bad I was, because I didn't want them to see how afraid I was. I was always losing my car. I'd wake up in the morning, I'd look out in the garage, the car be gone. Then you have to piece together the night before in your mind, you know. Hey man, did you see me? Where was I? Is my car there? Okay, good. Thank you. Thank God. Did I kill anybody? No. Okay, thank you. One day I walked out. You know, and this is the difference between normal people and an addict. Normal people get high, lose their car, they quit getting high. Addict get high, lose their car, they quit driving. One day I walked out and my car had a dead battery because I left the lights on. And I said, well, I can fix my car when I get home, because I only lived 3 or 4 blocks from work. I'll walk there in 7 minutes, 10 minutes, I'll get home, I'll fix my car. I got home that afternoon, my neighbor with the jumper cables didn't get home for about 2 hours, and I didn't want to put off my high, so I said, well, I'll get high today. I can fix my car tomorrow. My car sat in my garage for 2 years. That's where the disease of addiction had taken me. I could not take 30 minutes to jumpstart a car and drive it around the block. I had time to walk everywhere I went for 2 years. You see? Needless to say, when you don't have a car, you don't have a social life, you don't get very many dates. I became suicidally depressed. They began taking me to hospitals for the really, really nervous. You know. But, you know, addicts, the way we are, once we get the drugs out of our system, we're not really, really nervous anymore, and so they let us go. And besides, the second time that they took me to the hospital for the really, really nervous, the counselor that they assigned me was somebody that I partied with, and he figured it would be easier to let me go. Sorry about that, and all you at home. He figured it'd be easier to let me out than it would be to get a new connection, so they let me out with enough drugs for me to do the job right, and I did the job right. 4 days later, I was in intensive care. I was in the Lake Wells emergency room, flatline, DOA. I think the polite term is unresponsive, you know. And the doctor was telling me this because I don't remember anything. I woke up with my mother sitting at the foot of my bed, you know, and she was writing on a yellow legal pad. And what she was writing over and over was a phrase that kept running through her mind that she couldn't get out of her head. And what she was writing was, I am so much, you are so much, but together we are so much more. And what she didn't realize that she was writing on that yellow legal pad in 1976 was the spiritual principle of we. That's the founding principle of Narcotics Anonymous, the 12 steps, the 12 traditions, and the 12 concepts of Narcotics Anonymous. You know, our whole program and our whole message can be summed up in the word we, you know. Needless to say, the doctor came in and he told me, you know, when you were brought in, you were unresponsive, you were almost dead. We lost you a couple of times. We thought we were going to lose you when all of a sudden you sat up and you started pulling the tubes out of your throat and jerking the, you know, IVs out of your arm. The policeman that was standing next to me fell over 2 gurneys trying to get away because the corpse that he was standing next to stood up and started talking to him. And he looked me right dead in the eye and said, you know, you better think about what you're doing and the way you're living your life, because the next time you do this, you're not going to make it. And armed with that information, I went out and I used another 18 months. I know what it's like to use against my will. And they say insanity is doing the same thing, expecting different results. Brothers and sisters, I used knowing what was going to happen, and that is a place called hopelessness. You see, I thought that was the only way that my life was going to be. And I thought God had damned me to hell because I didn't keep my promise and became a preacher. I believed that. I believed that to the depth of my soul, that God had cursed me, and I couldn't understand why. You know, I ended up on the locked bathroom floor because the paranoia that had set in my disease told me that was the only safe place to be. In a moment of clarity that is a gift from God, I reached out to the Postal Service and said, I can't see past the next 5 minutes. I need help. And they said, welcome to the real world. We've been waiting for this for 3 years. They said, stay right where you are. We'll give you a call. The next day, they called me on the phone. They said, we got a guy up here at the post office we want you to talk to. I went up there. I walked in. The postmaster gave us his office. That's some serious stuff when the postmaster gives you his office. I walked in and he said, my name is Bill. I want to tell you about myself. Sit down. And he talked to me about himself for 45 minutes. He never said a thing about me. He never said, you're a loser, you're a flunky, you're an addict, you should be ashamed of yourself, you're breaking your mom and dad's heart, how can you do this? He said, no, I'm an addict. He told me about himself. And when he got to the end of his story, he said, now that I've told you about myself, is there anything you can identify with? And I said, yeah, all of it, you know, all of it. It was like a burden had lifted from me, you know. And he said, well, we can put you in treatment, you know, because the post office, if you ask for help, they have to give you help, you know, because it's a union job. So I went to treatment. You know, treatment's the place where you spend $10,000 to find out that meetings are free. And I want to thank all of you H&I angels, all of you people who do H&I. Thank you. Because it was a guy by the name of John Davis who showed up at Lakeland Regional Medical Center on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays and took all of us in a van to outside meetings. I owe my life forever to John Davis, and I can say his name because he passed away. But 2 miracles happened when I went up into treatment. The first miracle happened the very first night I was there. And I was reading the steps on the wall when they took me into the facility. And I didn't have any trouble admitting that I was insane. And yes, I had a little bit of hope because I had identified with Bill's story of addiction, found hope in his story of recovery. But then I got to that third step, made a decision to turn my life and will over to a God who has damned me to hell. You know, and that's not what it says, but that's what I read. You know, and I didn't know about that. But you know, when I went blind, when I was going blind, the doctor said, we're going to do all this surgery. It was a real difficult surgery. Let me tell you about addicts. And I said, well, what's the success rate on the surgery? And he says, 90%. And I went, only 90%? And he said, let's put it this. That's an addict. He said, let's put it this way. You got a 100% chance of going blind if we don't do the surgery. You know. So I figured I had a better chance with a God who damned me to hell than a disease that I knew was trying to kill me. You know. So I humbled myself, got down on my knees that night in my room, and I said, you know, God, I know you exist because a lot of people have spent a lot of time talking about you and writing books about you and dedicating their lives to you, and, you know, but I don't know you. I know Abraham Lincoln existed, but I never shook his hand. I never met him. I don't know him. And the most important words that I ever spoke came out of my mouth. I'm not going to make you any deals or any promises because I know I won't keep them. But if you don't help me, I'm going to die. You see. That was November 1st, 1977. From November the 1st, 1977 until this moment, I have not had to use again. And I'm trying to hurry up because I got up here late and my sense of timing is kind of thrown off. And a guy by the name of Billy E. from Richmond, and I know he's out there, once told me that the mind can absorb only what the butt can endure, so I'm trying to be merciful. Second miracle that happened, a guy came in to the treatment facility one night for a meeting that I delivered mail to. And I'm like, oh my God, you know. And he was the editor of our hometown newspaper, and I'm like sliding up underneath the table because I can see it now. Mailman in rehab. And then all of a sudden it dawned on me that the only people that were there for a meeting. And I sat up. And I said, what is he doing here, man? And after the meeting, he came over and said, you already know my name, obviously, but this is my phone number. And if there's anything I can do for you, give me a call. He was my first sponsor. Now, I'd like to say that I got clean in Narcotics Anonymous, and I've been clean in Narcotics. However, in 1977, in Florida, there was no NA in Central Florida. So I had to go to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. I am grateful to that fellowship that there was some place for me to go. When I heard the message of Narcotics Anonymous, I'm grateful to that fellowship that there was some place to go. When I heard the message of Narcotics Anonymous, I left that fellowship, joined Narcotics Anonymous, and have not gone back because I respect their traditions, because there is no way, after having heard the message of Narcotics Anonymous, that I can identify as anything other than an addict, you know. It kind of sticks in my throat. I'm an addict, you know. But I spent 8 years, and the one lesson that I always remember, my sponsor was a cowboy, because we have a lot of cowboys in Polk County. But he was an old cowboy. His family sold beef to the Army in World War I, and he always said, before you can brand a steer, you got to rope a steer. Before you can rope a steer, you got to cut it from the herd. Don't get cut from the herd. Don't get cut from the herd. You know, and in that very simple, and he didn't mean don't go along with the crowd, because the crowd ain't always going in the right direction. You know, what he meant was stay in the process. Keep coming back, no matter what. Keep coming back. If your butt falls off, put it in a bag and bring it to a meeting with you. Keep coming back. You know. About this time, I had 8 years clean. I got married and went through a divorce, and I had a violent confrontation with my biological mother. because all of this rage had seeped up in me, and I've never put my hands on anybody in my life. And what I was trying to do, I wasn't trying to hurt her. I was trying to shove her out of the way because she was standing in between me and somebody I was going after. And I thought she was taking up for them, and she was trying to keep me out of jail, And she fell and broke her wrist and broke her collarbone, and that broke my heart, man. And suddenly it dawned on me at that point that what was wrong with me didn't have anything to do with a substance. It had to do with all of the pent-up rage and the distorted perception that I had inside of me. Coincidentally, and I believe that we means there's no coincidences in NA. Coincidence is just God's way of keeping his anonymity, Coincidentally, a guy started coming to our meetings, and he said, we got an NA group started. Would you come and help us? I heard the message of Narcotics Anonymous. I've never turned back since. That was in 1985. This year marks 20 years that Narcotics Anonymous has been in Lake Wales, Florida. And even 3 hurricanes couldn't blow us away. The light of NA flickered, but it didn't go out, There were some meetings that we weren't allowed to have because they took place after curfew. We found out that a National Guardsman with an M16 is a power greater than ourselves. But I want to get right to it because, there's some things I want to say and then get out of here because I know y'all been sitting and thank you. Thank you so much for loving me. We didn't have the step working guide back then. All we had was those old steps that they came from Ohio, they came from Cincinnati, they came from Tennessee, they came from, I don't know where they came from. They were mimeographed on pieces of paper, and mine had been copied so many times it had a thumbprint in the first page, And when I came into Narcotics Anonymous, I couldn't find anybody who would sponsor me because I had 8 years clean in an area that was a year old. They wouldn't sponsor me. So I got all my recovery from speaker tapes. I listened to Greg P. I listened to Blaze. I listened to Jimmy Kennan. I listened to Pepe. I listened to Yo Steve. I listened to Lawrence. I listened to Dutch. I listened to Mona. I listened to Carmelita. I listened to Doreen P. I listened to him until I couldn't listen to him anymore. One of the greatest moments in my life came when I met Greg P. at a convention in South Florida, and I was able to thank him. I said, you don't know me, but you traveled in my pickup truck with me for 1,000 miles, carrying the message of Narcotics Anonymous to a little old country boy driving down a country road looking for an NA meeting. You made a difference in my life, and I was glad I could say that because 8 months later he passed away, And what I always like to do at this point, I want to talk to the person who's listening to this tape right now. I'm not talking to the audience. I'm talking to the person who's listening to this tape right now. You may have some time. You may be new. Somebody handed you this tape. I want you to know that when this tape was made, I was sitting in a room with almost 1,000 addicts clean, and in another room, clean, with clean clothes, with gold jewelry, with bright smiles, with hopes and dreams and freedom from active addiction. And when we circle up at the end of this meeting in that human circle of hope, and we have that moment of silence for the addict still suffering and for the one looking for a better way of life, one of the people we pray for here tonight was you. Welcome to Narcotics Anonymous. Welcome home. You don't ever have to use again. But we began working the steps, those old steps, and I'm working in the step working guide now because my sponsor is a step working drill sergeant, and my whole family is. But that first step, the first question of the first step said, What do you have to give to the we of Narcotics Anonymous? And that's what I like to talk about is we, and then I'll shut up and get out of here. Because we is all of the steps, all of the traditions, all of the concepts of our program. My sponsor asked me, okay, what does the word we mean to you? And being a smartass, I said, more than one. You know? I found out that the word we means don't be a smartass if you don't want to spend the rest of your life riding on the first step, you know. But I learned that we, in the first step, we is the truth that sets us free. We is the honesty that keeps us free. We is the identification. You tell the truth about you, I see the truth about me. Because I identify with an addict, I have an identity as an addict. Because I have an identity as an addict, I become a member of a fellowship, of a community, of a support group. We is all of those things. You know, I spent a whole lot of time out in the real world trying to convince people I was a whole lot of things I wasn't, and I wasn't a whole lot of things I was. You see, when I come up into Narcotics Anonymous, I don't need to be blowing smoke. You know, I need to be real about who I am with me, because the person I lie to and deceive the most is myself. You know, the disease of addiction is a disease of self-deception, and I need y'all because it's hard to spot self-deception by yourself. You say, duh. We in the second step is a power greater than myself. The hope that I felt because I identified with your story of addiction. I found hope in your story of recovery. We is the power. We is that open invitation. We is that nothing takes the place of a simple loving hug. We is that hug that says, welcome. We love you. Keep coming back. We want you. We need you. The first power greater than myself is this little lady that used to walk up and take my hand and said, if nobody told you they love you today, let me tell you I love you. I came back for a year just to hear that lady told me she loved me. I never got invited back anywhere I ever was in active addiction. I had hardcore drug dealers tell people, don't you ever bring him back to my house, ever. Because I was a poster child for rehab, you know. We as hope. Every person, if you came up in here tonight, you newcomers, people in 90 days, a year, 5 years, you don't have to have any amount of clean time to be having a low self-esteem problem, you know, because that stuff resurfaces every now and then. But if you're sitting there thinking tonight you don't have any value, let me tell you something. Every person in this room is a visible proof of an invisible power working in the lives of addicts today. As the lawyers would say, Exhibit A, you know. We are Exhibit A. We in the third step. And I'm not going to tell you how to work the steps. This is just the spiritual principle of we that I glean from these things. We in the third step, God as I understand Him. God as I understand Him didn't have to be the God of your understanding. We all had a right to a God as I understand Him. And I got to change the God of my misunderstanding for a God of my understanding, you see. When I first came into Narcotics Anonymous, it hurt my feelings that they took the Lord's Prayer out of the rooms. But somebody, a wise and loving old-timer, sat down and said, you know, we in Narcotics Anonymous, our literature has been translated into 20 different languages. We're in 100 countries around the world. Not all of those people are Southern Baptists, you know. Our fellowship encompasses Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, again, Native American spirituality. We all have a right. And when they explained it to me, I understood. And I went, yeah, you're right, you know. And I'm going to tell you something else. One of the things that used to bother me is when people said that they were offended by that prayer. I'm not offended by the prayers of a Muslim. I'm not offended by the prayers of a Buddhist. I'm not offended by the Native American. I'm not offended by prayer at all. Because I think a prayer, any prayer, no matter what prayer, is an expression of man's relationship with God. Mother Teresa used to say, you pray in your faith and I'll pray in mine. Together we'll make something beautiful for God. In my search for a God of my understanding, I have read the Quran, I have read the Bible, I have read the Apocrypha, I have read many, many, many sacred texts. And the one thing I have gleaned from all of that is I do not have to understand God. God understands me. Out of all of the places I could have wound up and all the people I could have wound up with, I'm in a room full of people just like myself in Narcotics Anonymous. Step 4, we was the courage to take that journey inside, knowing I didn't have to go alone and knowing I wouldn't be judged. Step 5 was a relationship step. I started having a relationship with God, with myself, with other people, sponsorship, vulnerability, communication. Step 6 and 7, we live in a state of grace. We don't need to. Narcotics Anonymous is not a place where we get what we deserve. So we don't need to be walking around deciding what somebody else deserves. You see? If I'm walking around, we don't need to be walking around deciding. If I'm walking around with a bat wanting to beat people over the head with it, I better be wearing a helmet myself. In step 8, I learned about integrity. It doesn't matter what anybody else does. We is in reconciliation, restoration, and healing. I had a healing with my biological mother because of the steps, because we addressed this. I came home from a convention. They told me that June had a stroke. I went up into her hospital room. I was the only one in the room. The nurse brought a bowl of soup. I was feeding my biological mother soup like she used to feed me when I was a baby. And this voice in my head said, take a picture, man. Take a picture. There's been a healing. There's been a healing here. That healing was made possible by all you sisters who came up in these rooms and told me about the pain of children you had lost, children who had died, children who had been abandoned, children that you had to give up. You shared your pain with me, a man, and I saw that I did not have a right to judge my mother. She did the best she could at the time. The most important thing about this is that the scars of addicts, the scars of addicts have the ability to heal other people's open wounds. You show me your scars and my own wounds are healed, you see. I'm not going to go through any more because we're running late and people are... We was vigilance in the 10th step, In the 11th step, it was learning to take the focus off myself by sitting quietly at God's feet and not thinking. Prayer and meditation is not so much about me telling God what I want, because God already knows what I want. It's about just giving up my mind for 30 minutes, to God. And if I can make myself available to God and fully present to God, then I can make myself available and fully present to you guys too, you see. It's about learning. There used to be this verse in the Bible, and this is not a Sunday school. It's like, there is no greater love than a man lay down his life for a friend. I found out that laying down your life didn't mean you had to die. It just meant you set aside time for other people. Maybe you didn't watch that Monday night football game and took a newcomer to a meeting, because I don't have the ability to affect that football game, but I can make a difference in the life of that newcomer. And we in the 12th step is about giving back what we have so freely received without exception. I always like that W-E, without exception, you see. And this is out of Senior Citizens Edition. I keep telling people that if our fellowship keeps getting older and bigger, one of these days we're going to be having H&I meetings in convalescent homes. I'd like to welcome you to the Take Your Teeth Out group of Narcotics Anonymous. But we is without exception. It is absolutely, and this is from step 12, and it works how and why. It is absolutely none of our business to decide who is ready to hear the message of recovery and who is not. Many of us have formed such a judgment about an addict's desire for recovery and have been mistaken. Multiple relapses do not necessarily signify a lack of interest in recovery, nor does the model newcomer demonstrate without a doubt a certainty of making it. It is our purpose and our privilege to share the message of recovery unconditionally with anyone expressing a desire to receive it. Bear with me about 5 more minutes. There was this guy named Frank. He was audio hallucinatory schizophrenic. Any of y'all who ever saw the movie A Beautiful Mind with Russell Crowe know that audio hallucinatory schizophrenic means that Frank had invisible friends. And he brought them to meetings with him. You know, if you were at a meeting with Frank, before you sat down, you had to say, "Is this chair taken?" You know. Yeah. But Frank lived in Chicago, and his parents sent him to Lake Wales because he was in all kind of trouble. They had enough money to keep him out of jail, but they sent him to an uncle, and his uncle gave him to my sponsor, and guess who my sponsor gave him to? And I can remember the conversation because Frank scared me. Frank was my size. He was 6'5", he weighed 250 pounds. He was dressed in Harley Davidson black leather vest, chaps, the stirrup boots, the Harley shirt, the bandana, the dark glasses, the knuckle buster rings, the leather belt, you know, the chains, and drove a Pinto. Addiction is about the images we create and try to pass off as ourselves. Right? And Frank could only say 2 words, yeah and wow. He could say wow backwards, wow. But my sponsor said, "You're going to take this guy to meetings and you're going to sponsor this guy." And I said, "You want me to take this guy to a meeting in my car alone?" Because I knew they were going to find my lifeless body beside the road with my heart cut out and Frank sitting there cross-legged singing some kind of devil mantra. But I did what my sponsor said, because back in those days, I honestly believed that that man had the power to revoke my clean time if I do it or else, you know, feel the fear and do it anyway. So I took Frank to meetings for 6 weeks, and he went back to Chicago. I was never so glad. Bye, Frank. Don't write. See you. I was like Mr. Recovery. You know, I was a made man with God because I had survived Frank, and I forgot about Frank. About 3 years later, I walked into a meeting. I'm getting my coffee and my donut, and I hear this voice, "Hi, Chuck." And I don't want to look over my shoulder, and I turn around and look, and I couldn't remember his name. And he comes bounding up to me, like my size. "Do you remember me? It's Frank." "Frank." "How you doing, Frank?" "Well, I'm doing okay. I'm going to meetings. I'm reading a basic text. I got a sponsor. I'm working the steps. I had a little relapse, but I'm back in the rooms. I'm down here in Lake Wales visiting my uncle. I got 2 years clean, and I'm chairing the meeting tonight." All I could say was, "Yeah, wow." Wow. And Frank moved to Lake Wales. He became the coffee maker of our group. He never missed. The coffee was measured to the last grain. The circle was geometrically perfect, you know. And God help you if you dinked one of the chairs out of line. But God taught me a lesson with Frank. I remember one time, he had about 10 years clean, I had about 14 years clean, and I was blowing smoke up his butt and taking credit for his recovery, you know. "Gee, Frank, I'm so glad that God let me be a part of your life, and, you know, every time I see you, you know, I'm reminded that God is still in the miracle business, yada, yada, yada." And Frank is real serious. He doesn't know how to kid. You know, he can repeat entire paragraphs of the basic text. And I'm blowing smoke up his butt, you know, and what I'm saying in my brain is, "Yeah, aren't you glad I was in your life, you know, or you'd been dead because no one wanted to give you a ride, and you'd still be in the bathroom looking at your reflection in the mirror if it wasn't for me, you know." And on the outside, I'm telling him what a miracle he is. On the inside, I'm taking credit for it. And he just looked at me and went, "Well, Chuck, I just kept telling myself, if you could do it, I could do it too." Frank's still clean. Frank's still clean. Come to find out that the reason that Frank could only say yeah and wow is because he was afraid of me. He didn't want to get in my pickup truck anymore, and I wanted to take him because I guess he thought I was going to take him out in the woods and sacrifice him to the gods of country music or something. But Frank's still clean, and my sponsor, I had forgotten. I had gotten well. I had forgotten that when I came in the rooms, I was the one dressed in black with the dark glasses and the no teeth, standing in the back of the rooms with my arms across my chest, trying to act so bad and mean because I didn't want you guys to see how afraid I was, because I thought you were going to ask me to leave, and I didn't have anywhere else to go. You see, I didn't have anywhere else to go then. I don't have anywhere else I want to go now. You know, when I came into Narcotics Anonymous, when I came into recovery, I weighed 140 pounds from my soles of my feet to the top of my head. Today I weigh 140 pounds from my belt to my neck. I've gained a whole nother me in recovery. Just to tell you about myself so I can get out of here. The post office that wanted to fire me 27 years ago promoted me to supervisor last year, a relief supervisor. I didn't want to be full-time because I didn't want to spend the last 3 years of my career in some mail processing center in some big city. But last November I celebrated 30 years in the Postal Service. 30 years. I've had a career, you know. Thanks to God, thanks to NA, thanks to you guys. I've had a career. I'm 3 years away from retirement. Addicts don't retire. You know? Narcotics Anonymous has taken me from membership in the Woodstock generation to membership in AARP. That's the American Association of Retired People, you know. I'm in a relationship with a beautiful woman today, the kind of relationship to where she knows, because of God's spiritual principles and you guys, Joanna, and I love you, Joanna, and I'll be home tomorrow night. Trust me to leave, get on a plane, come to Virginia, knowing I'm going to come back home in the same condition that I left, untampered with and still in love with her, you know. And you know something? That's the way I want it to be. You see? That's the way I want it to be. The greatest moment in my life came not when I realized that I was hers, that she was mine in her heart. The greatest moment came when I realized that I was hers in mine, you see. Because addicts don't make commitments, you see. I thought I was a failure. I thought I was a failure because I wanted to become a preacher and became an addict. I became an addict, you know. Matter of fact, I wanted to be a preacher. I studied to be a psychologist and became an addict, you know. But of the three, I found that the addict is the most important. Our basic text tells us that the most effective weapon in the war against addiction is the recovering addict, you know. And the reason that this is, preachers will try and pray you out of hell. Psychologists will use a bunch of fancy language and try to trick you into coming out on your own. But addicts, we're different, you see. Addicts will walk into hell, grab you by the seat of your pants, and walk your happy ass out themselves. There's a beautiful reading that says why addicts have been given the message of hope. It says, we have been chosen because we have been the outcasts of mankind, and our long experience as suffering addicts has made us humbly alert to the cries of distress that come from the lonely hearts of desperate addicts everywhere. We have the privilege and the purpose of reconciling the living dead, the walking dead of addiction, back to the land of the living. We have that purpose. We have that privilege. Because, you know, conventions are great. They're wonderful to come together and party. And you guys have put on a wonderful convention here. But our primary purpose is still out there in the dark, cold streets of addiction, waiting for somebody to bring them the light. We come up into this light. It's not our job to keep the light to ourselves, to bask in the light, to wallow in the light, to keep the light to ourselves. We're here to harvest the light and take that light back out into the dark and share it with the addict who needs. I always say a prayer. I always say a prayer, yeah. I always say a poem, and then I go. And it's about we as the outstretched hand. It's a poem that I said when I got out of treatment, and I've been saying every time I share because it reflects. And I could go on and on and on about the spiritual principles of we. I got 150 pages on the word we. 150 pages on the word we. You see, I couldn't wait to start on the word autonomous. You know. But there's this poem that expresses the spiritual principle of we, and it's called The Outstretched Hand, and it goes like this. And it's by Rod McEwen, if you ever want to look it up. And it goes like this. Each of us was made by God, and some of us grew tall. Others stood out in the wind. Their branches bent and fell. Those of us who walk in light, must help the ones in darkness up. For that's what life is all about, and love is all there is to life. Each of us was made by God, beautiful in His mind's eye. Those of us who turned out sound should look across their shoulders once and help the weak ones to their feet. It only takes an outstretched hand. Brothers and sisters, we are the outstretched hand of a merciful God to a suffering world. Only we can carry the message of Narcotics Anonymous to the addict who still suffers. And in leaving, I want to remind you of the words that my mother wrote on that yellow legal pad 28 years ago. I am so much, you are so much. But together, brothers and sisters, we are so much more. Virginia, I love you. Thanks for making a difference in my life. Thank you for letting me share.